The Galactic Empire's council chamber buzzed with tension. The air was thick, not just with the smell of ozone from the high-tech atmosphere scrubbers, but with the collective anxiety of the Empire's top officials. For months, Earth had resisted, proving far more troublesome than anticipated. Resources had been drained, and reputations had been tarnished. At the center of the room stood Lord Drakes, towering over the others in his ornate military uniform, his black eyes narrowing as he surveyed the gathered council. His voice cut through the low murmurs like a blade. "We cannot afford another failure," he snarled, fists clenched. "Our finest armies, our most advanced fleets, Earth has outmaneuvered them all. This is no longer a matter of strategy. This is personal." The gathered officials exchanged uneasy glances. Earth was a backwater planet, technologically inferior to the vast might of the Galactic Empire. And yet, somehow, they had withstood the Empire's relentless assault. "The answer is simple," a voice from the shadows said. Heads turned as a cloaked figure stepped forward, its long, sinuous limbs moving with an eerie grace. This was Kartek, the leader of the galaxy's most feared assassin squad, the New York Cra. Their reputation was whispered in fear across countless star systems. They never failed. "We eliminate Earth's leadership. Without their heads, the body will wither," Kartek said, his voice a low hiss. "My assassins will strike swiftly and silently. Their leaders won't know what hit them." Drakes gave a nod. "Very well. Earth has stymied us for too long. Do what you must." Across the galaxy, on a small, unassuming island hidden deep in the misty forests of Japan, a lone figure knelt. The Earth Order had always been a secretive group, masters of an ancient discipline that had survived countless wars and upheavals. But even within their ranks, this operative was special. His movements were precise, his breath steady. In front of him lay a single black blade, its surface reflecting the dim light of a flickering candle. A whisper broke the silence. "The New York Cra have been deployed." The ninja opened his eyes, a cold calm settling over him. The New York Cra were legendary, their assassinations flawless, their presence undetectable. They were bred to kill. But he, too, was a weapon, honed not through technology, but through discipline, stealth, and patience. He stood slowly, gathering his blade and pulling his black hood over his head. He had been trained to be invisible, to use the shadows themselves as his allies. As he moved through the dense forests, the trees seemed to swallow him whole, and the world outside could no longer perceive him. For Earth's leaders, the threat wasn't the assassins who were coming. It was the one who would stop them. The first assassination was set to occur in the heart of Earth's most secure facility, beneath the fortified city of New Seoul. The Galactic Empire had been watching Earth's defenses for months, learning their patterns, anticipating their weaknesses. And tonight they would strike. A sleek, insect-like ship hovered silently above the city, cloaked from all sensors. Inside, the New York Cra assassins prepared for their mission. Kartek, their leader, surveyed the team. "We are ghosts," he reminded them, his voice cold and emotionless. "We are death itself. Earth will fall by our hands." The assassins vanished into the night, their cloaking technology rendering them invisible to all known forms of detection. They moved swiftly, their limbs silently carrying them across rooftops, slipping past guards and surveillance like shadows in the wind. But as the first assassin approached the target, something shifted in the air. He paused, his 4 eyes scanning the surroundings. For the first time, he felt watched. A flicker of doubt crossed his mind, but he dismissed it quickly. He was New York Cra. No one could see him. A soft rustle came from behind. The assassin turned, his multi-limbed body coiling with predatory grace. Nothing. Just the night. He continued forward, his mind focused on the kill. And then it happened. In the blink of an eye, the world went dark for the assassin. A swift, silent strike cut through his cloaked form, and his body crumpled to the ground without a sound. From the shadows, the ninja watched, his blade dripping with the faintest trace of alien blood. One down. The remaining assassins continued their mission, unaware that their numbers had just been reduced. The ninja moved silently through the facility, his senses heightened, every breath controlled. He could feel the presence of the New York Cra, like a ripple in the air, and he knew where they would go next. As the second assassin moved deeper into the facility, a soft clicking noise echoed in his ear. He froze. That noise shouldn't have been there. The facility was supposed to be silent. His mind raced, calculating the possibilities, but before he could react, his vision blurred. Another silent kill. Another shadow fallen. But this time, there was a difference. A small, nearly imperceptible signal sent from the assassin's body as it hit the floor. A signal to the rest of the squad. Kartek's eyes narrowed as he received the message. Something was wrong. 2 of his elite had failed to report in. He pulled up the live feed from their cloaked helmets, only to see static. Impossible. His assassins were the best in the galaxy, equipped with the finest technology. And yet, they were vanishing. He spoke into his comms, his voice a deadly whisper. "We have a problem." From the darkness, the ninja watched as Kartek's squad began to falter. Their movements, once confident, now carried a hint of hesitation. They knew something was hunting them. But they didn't know what. And that was the ninja's greatest weapon. He slipped deeper into the facility, his presence undetectable, his mission clear. The hunt had only just begun. The New York Cra moved through the shadows of New Seoul's labyrinthine underground with a precision born from decades of elite training. Their forms barely disturbed the air as they advanced, invisible to the world around them. But something had shifted. There was a tension in the air, palpable and unspoken. Kartek had noticed it first, the subtle hesitation in his team's movements, the lingering glances over their shoulders. The assassins who thrived on their mastery of fear were now becoming prey to an unfamiliar unease. "Keep moving," Kartek commanded through the encrypted comms. "We split into 2 teams. There's interference, but we are New York Cra. Nothing escapes us." The assassins obeyed, though with less certainty than before. They were accustomed to flawless operations, where their only challenge was the kill itself. Yet now, their impeccable instincts whispered warnings they couldn't ignore. And for beings who survived on instinct, that was unnerving. From his vantage point in the facility's ventilation system, the ninja watched. His breathing remained controlled, measured. His mind was a still pond, calm and clear. He had learned, long ago, that emotion was the enemy of the unseen. A single lapse in focus, a single stray thought, could betray his presence. The New York Cra were searching, but they were searching in the wrong places. Their eyes scanned for thermal signatures, their sensors extended for any trace of movement. But the ninja had learned to suppress his body heat, to move with the silence of falling leaves. As the 2 groups of assassins split, the ninja followed the larger group. He moved through the ventilation system like a shadow passing through the wind, invisible, weightless. Beneath him, 3 New York Cra assassins paused at a junction. One of them, Aegis, raised a hand. "Something's wrong," Aegis muttered. His alien voice, usually confident, now carried a note of doubt. "I can feel it. Your senses are playing tricks," said the leader of the group, a towering assassin named Merc. His voice was sharp, dismissive. "Focus on the mission." Aegis hesitated, his 4 eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. "No. It's more than that. We've lost 2 of our own. Something's hunting us." Before Merc could respond, a soft thud echoed from above. The assassins snapped their heads upward, their weapons drawn in an instant. But there was nothing to see, just the faintest whisper of disturbed air. Merc stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he examined the ceiling. He reached up, adjusting his visor to scan for invisible threats. And then the ninja struck. In one fluid motion, he dropped from the ceiling, his black blade flashing through the air. Before Merc could react, the ninja's blade sliced through his neck, severing the assassin's head from his body. Aegis and the 3rd assassin sprang into action, but it was already too late. The ninja was gone, retreating back into the shadows before they could fire a shot. The 2 remaining assassins stood frozen for a moment, staring at their fallen leader's lifeless body. "Impossible," Aegis whispered. "How?" There! The third assassin fired wildly into the darkness, but the shots hit only empty air. Their cloaking technology, once their greatest asset, had been rendered useless. They couldn't see what was hunting them, couldn't sense it. And that, the ninja knew, was the greatest weapon of all. Back at the Galactic Empire's command center, Lord Drakes watched the mission's progress, or rather, its lack of progress, with increasing frustration. The live feeds from the assassins' helmets showed nothing but static, and reports of their success had gone silent. He slammed his fist onto the console. Why haven't they completed the mission? This should have been over by now. Beside him, Kartek stood impassive, though beneath the surface, a gnawing doubt had begun to take hold. His assassins were the best, hand-picked for their ruthlessness and precision. But now, they were disappearing without a trace. Send reinforcements, Drakes demanded. No. Kartek's voice was calm, cold. More troops will only alert Earth's forces. This is something else. Something different. Drakes turned, his eyes narrowing. Are you suggesting they've been compromised? That Earth has something we don't know about? Kartek didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied the static-filled screen. I'm saying that whoever is out there hunting my assassins is not bound by the same rules we are. Aegis crouched in the dark corridor, his breathing shallow, his 4 eyes darting between every shadow. The third assassin, Rithak, stood a few paces behind him, her weapon raised and ready. The tension between them was thick, both of them realizing how truly vulnerable they were. What now? Rithak whispered. We retreat. Report back to Kartek, Aegis replied, his voice low but steady. This isn't what we were prepared for. As they turned to leave, the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop. The air grew still, unnaturally so. Aegis froze, his instincts screaming at him. It happened in an instant. The ninja's blade emerged from the shadows, slicing through the air with deadly precision. Rithak barely had time to react before she crumpled to the ground, the life draining from her as quickly as it had come. Aegis was alone now, his mind racing, panic threatening to take over. He fired wildly into the darkness, but the ninja was gone once again. Aegis staggered backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He knew he had to escape, but every step he took felt like it was leading him closer to death. In the silence that followed, Aegis felt a presence, an overwhelming, suffocating presence, that pressed against his mind. The ninja wasn't just a physical threat. He was something more. Aegis stumbled, his vision blurring. And in the distance, barely audible, he could hear a soft, mocking whisper. Aegis ran, his footsteps echoing through the cold, sterile corridors of the underground complex. The lights overhead flickered erratically, casting long shadows that seemed to shift with every breath. His pulse raced, every instinct screaming at him to keep moving, to escape. He had never been hunted before, never felt this kind of fear. As a New York Raw assassin, he was the predator, always the one in control. But now, something invisible, something beyond his comprehension was stalking him. His mind raced through the possibilities. Was this some secret Earth technology? An elite human operative? No, it was something more. It had to be. His comm unit crackled to life. Kartek's voice came through, cold and sharp. Aegis, report. Aegis fumbled for the device, his hands trembling. Kartek, it's not. He paused, his throat tightening as he glanced around. We're being hunted. Murik and Rithak, they're dead. There was a brief silence on the other end, then Kartek's voice returned, as steady as ever. Calm yourself. You are New York Kra. You are not prey. Aegis wiped the sweat from his brow, forcing himself to breathe. It's not just any enemy, Kartek. They strike before we even sense them. This thing knows how we operate. It's as if they're one step ahead. Kartek's response was slow, measured. Then you need to be 2 steps ahead. Aegis nodded, though the cold fear gripping his chest did not lessen. He switched off the comm and looked around, his vision adjusting to the dim light. He was in a maintenance tunnel now, a narrow passageway rarely used, but familiar enough from his reconnaissance. His mind raced with possibilities, strategies. How could he outmaneuver something he couldn't even see? He took a deep breath and made his decision. He would stop running. If he couldn't fight his attacker head-on, he would set the trap. He moved silently to the side of the tunnel, crouching behind a series of exposed pipes. His cloaking technology flickered on, rendering him invisible to any sensor, any eye. Now, he would wait. In the command center, Lord Drakes paced with mounting frustration. How have we not heard back from the assassins yet? This delay is unacceptable. Kartek remained calm, standing with arms crossed. They are encountering resistance, he said coolly. Something unexpected. But my assassins will prevail. Drakes stopped, turning to face him. Unexpected? Earth's forces were supposed to be vulnerable. You assured me this would be swift and clean. That was before. Kartek's eyes narrowed, his voice growing colder. We underestimated them. This resistance, it is not from Earth's military. This is something else. Drakes glared. I don't care what it is. Get it under control. Kartek merely nodded. It will be done. As Drakes turned away, Kartek's gaze lingered on the static-filled screens. His mind churned, calculating. Whoever this enemy was, they were not merely skilled, they were precise, methodical, and utterly lethal. But more than that, they had mastered the art of fear, turning the New York Craw's own tactics against them. And that worried him. Aegis remained still, his breath shallow, his heart pounding. Minutes passed. His training told him to stay calm, to wait, but every nerve in his body was on edge. The silence was suffocating, and in it, he could hear every subtle shift of air, every creak of the structure around him. Then he heard it. The faintest whisper of movement, a sound so subtle that only someone trained to listen for the slightest irregularity would notice it. Aegis' eyes widened. His attacker was here. He held his breath, waiting for the perfect moment. His hands gripped his weapon, fingers steady despite the panic clawing at his mind. A shadow shifted in the dim light, a figure moving silently through the tunnel. The enemy was close, close enough to strike. With a sudden burst of motion, Aegis leaped from his hiding place, firing his weapon in rapid succession. The energy bolts lit up the tunnel in blinding flashes, but there was nothing, no impact, no target. His shots hit only empty air. He froze, his heart sinking. How? Before he could react, a cold presence enveloped him. It wasn't a physical sensation, but something deeper, something that gnawed at the edges of his mind. His breath itched, his vision blurring as a whisper, barely audible, echoed in his ears. You cannot hide. Aegis spun around, his weapon raised, but his movements were sluggish, uncoordinated. The presence grew stronger, suffocating him, pressing against his thoughts, warping them. He staggered backward, clutching his head. His instincts screamed at him to flee, but his body refused to obey. Suddenly he saw it, a flicker of movement, just at the edge of his vision. A black shape, a blade glinting in the dim light. And then, with terrifying speed, it was upon him. The ninja moved like a shadow, his blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Aegis barely had time to raise his arm in defense, but it was futile. The blade found its mark, cutting deep into his side. Aegis gasped, the pain searing through him, but even now, as he collapsed to the ground, his eyes searched for the face of his attacker. But there was nothing. Only darkness. In the silent aftermath of Aegis' fall, the ninja knelt, wiping the blood from his blade. His movements were calm, methodical. He had learned long ago that the fight was not just about killing. It was about dismantling the enemy's will to fight. The New York Craw had relied on their fearsome reputation, their superior technology, but that wasn't enough. Not against him. He rose, his eyes scanning the tunnel. The hunt wasn't over. In the far distance, another faint signal flickered on his radar. He wasn't alone in the facility. More would come. They always did. But for now, he would wait. And when they came, they would learn the same lesson. The darkness was not their ally anymore. It was his. Kartek's hands hovered over the console, his eyes locked on the static-filled displays. His breath was steady, but his mind churned with calculations, probabilities. He could feel it, the slow unraveling of his squad. The New York CRA had never failed, never been so utterly compromised. And yet here they were, one by one, falling into the void of silence. Aegis is down. The confirmation came from the last remaining assassin, Varric, who stood hidden in the far corner of New Sol's subterranean labyrinth. His voice carried a faint tremor, something Kartek had never heard from one of his own. Fear. Kartek clenched his jaw, unwilling to let his frustration show. Varric, listen carefully. This enemy knows our tactics. You need to stop thinking like a New York CRA. Varric's breath crackled through the comms. I don't know what this is, Kartek. It's not like anything we've faced. It's everywhere. Kartek closed his eyes, focusing. Calm your mind. They are using your fear against you. Focus on your training. Varric didn't respond immediately, but Kartek could hear the assassin's breathing begin to slow, the tremor fading. He knew what this mission had become. The New York CRA were no longer hunting. They were being hunted. And there was only one way to survive: turn the tables, adapt. Varric began to move, his footsteps silent but deliberate. He activated his cloaking device, slipping into the shadows like vapor. He could still feel it, that creeping sensation that something, someone, was always just behind him. But now, he had a plan. The ninja remained perfectly still, his eyes closed as he listened to the faint echoes of the facility. He could sense the last New York CRA moving, but something had changed. This one wasn't panicking like the others. This one was disciplined, strategic. The ninja's heart rate remained steady, his mind focused. His mission wasn't over yet, but the end was close. The New York CRA's greatest weapon, fear, had already been neutralized. Now, all that remained was the final strike. He shifted slightly, positioning himself at the edge of a large ventilation duct that overlooked the main corridor. The dim lights below flickered, casting long, ominous shadows. His senses were heightened, every detail sharp. He could feel the subtle vibrations in the air, the faint hum of machinery, the distant footsteps. The New York CRA assassin was getting closer. Varric moved with precision, his cloaking device keeping him invisible to any sensor or eye. He knew the ninja was out there, waiting for him to make a mistake. But Varric was no ordinary assassin. He had survived dozens of impossible missions by outsmarting his opponents, by anticipating their every move. He activated his secondary visor, scanning the area for heat signatures, but as expected, there was nothing. The ninja was skilled, too skilled. But Varric had something the others hadn't used: patience. His plan was simple: let the ninja come to him. From his position in the ventilation system, the ninja waited. He could feel the subtle shift in the assassin's movements. This one wasn't running, wasn't reacting out of fear. He was waiting, expecting an attack. A trap. The ninja's mind worked quickly, calculating his next move. A direct confrontation would be reckless. The New York CRA was still dangerous, even when cornered. But the ninja didn't rely on brute strength. He relied on the one thing the New York CRA couldn't counter: uncertainty. He reached into his belt, pulling out a small spherical device. He placed it on the edge of the ventilation shaft and activated it. The device emitted a faint pulse, sending out a wave of static interference across the area. It would mask his movements for the next few minutes. The ninja moved silently, dropping down into the shadows of the corridor. The flickering lights cast distorted shapes on the walls, giving him ample cover. He could hear Varric's breathing, steady, focused. The assassin was close. Varric felt the shift in the air. His visor flickered, the cloaking device around him momentarily sputtering as interference washed over his sensors. The ninja was near. He kept his posture low, his weapon ready, every muscle in his body coiled to strike. He wouldn't be caught off guard like the others. He had learned from their mistakes. The ninja's pattern was clear now: attack from the shadows, swift and silent, then disappear before anyone could react. But Varric was ready. His enhanced vision caught the faintest movement at the edge of the corridor. A shadow, too fluid to be anything else. Without hesitation, Varric fired, the energy bolts ripping through the air. They struck the wall, the floor, but nothing else. The shadow vanished. Varric's eyes darted around the corridor, searching for any sign of the ninja. His mind raced. Was it another trick? A diversion? Then he felt it, a soft breeze, so subtle it was almost imperceptible. His heart stopped. The ventilation ducked. He spun around just in time to see the black figure drop silently from above. The ninja's blade flashed in the dim light, and Varric barely managed to deflect it with his weapon. Sparks flew as the two clashed in a flurry of motion, both moving faster than human eyes could follow. Varric's training took over, every strike precise, every movement calculated. But the ninja was faster, more fluid, his attacks unpredictable. Varric couldn't keep up. He could feel his strength waning, his body tiring from the constant barrage. The ninja's blade grazed his arm, cutting deep. Varric grunted in pain, but he didn't stop. He wouldn't stop. With a final burst of energy, Varric lunged forward, aiming for the ninja's chest. But the ninja sidestepped, his movement so smooth it was almost graceful. In one swift motion, the ninja's blade found its mark, cutting through Varric's side. The New York Craw assassin stumbled, gasping for breath as blood spilled from the wound. He collapsed to his knees, his vision blurring. The ninja stood over him, silent, his blade dripping with blood. Varric looked up, his eyes filled with defiance. "What are you?" The ninja said nothing. He turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Varric to die alone in the cold, empty corridor. In the command center, Kartek's eyes remained fixed on the screen, his mind racing. The mission had failed. His assassins were gone, defeated by a single enemy. But as he stared at the static-filled display, a new realization dawned on him. This wasn't over. Not yet. And he knew exactly what he had to do next.